We are now live, ladies and gentlemen. I am not Jacob Horn, even though you probably are watching it on his LinkedIn or our YouTube here at Summit 7. But it's a pleasure to see you. My name is Daniel Akeridge. I'm the co-host here of the CUI Hotline every week, and I'm joined by the mighty man himself, the wizard of CUI, Ryan Bonner. Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you. Very excited to talk to you this week about all the things CUI and all things CMMC. You are probably the most articulate man. You are the most articulate man I've ever met about CUI and CUI data flow scoping. So it's really a pleasure to have you. You're a dear friend, of course. But yeah, tell us a little bit about kind of your week and what's been going on.
Yeah, you asked me like, hey, how are you going to describe your week for the live stream? And the only thing I could think of was like, man, primes be priming.
Primes be priming.
The primes are doing what primes do, which is expert level risk transfer. And we're just starting to see like more and more like pointed language, very specific asks, scrutiny being applied to organizations. We're just seeing people ping us and say, hey, I just got a message from this prime.
Yeah.
And they just told me you are absolutely on my list of people who are going to need that certification. And this isn't even like a horse trading, right? Like this is when you're going to have it. I'm only interested in one date.
You won.
When you will have that available for me. And it's really activating, people who thought they would have more time, people who, are battling scheduling constraints and things like that. And we're just seeing a lot of people show up who were not part of the conversation until now.
And that's what's interesting. I was at a conference last week. I think it was last week. Time flies these days. And somebody walks up to me and shows me an ExoStar like site. I'm like, oh yeah, I know an ExoStar. They're like, no, look at this. And it was like the primes asking them to put in the date of their assessment, which has been more common recently, the name of their C3PAO. And I'm like, okay. So the primes are actually like getting really interested in not only the dates, but who you're working with. Cause it sounds crazy. They're actually going to validate that you're compliant and went through a certification potentially. Hey, I used CyberSec Investments. I used Align. I used fill in the blank. It's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out because I know HII has sent out stuff, Lockheed sent out stuff, Boeing sent out stuff. Like I'm sure like RTX and all of them have also been doing their due diligence because we talked earlier before we went live. It's like, there's no more like, hey, you should do this. Mm-hmm. It might be a good idea to do this. It's like, hey, like you got to do this and you've like got to do it like right now. And everyone's like freaking out. But then I hear things like, oh, Daniel, government shutdown happened. I'm so thankful. It happened because guess what?
A stay of execution.
A stay of execution. And it's like, kind of, I was like, that doesn't change the November 10th date. That just changes how fast you might be awarded a contract. That might be delayed. But when November 10th rolls around, especially if we're still in shutdown, which knock on wood, that's not the case. But if we are, as soon as you get back, some of those contracts you were hoping to be awarded before CMMC went into effect might actually be awarded after CMMC goes into effect. So it's a little problematic there when it comes to that, which you hit on it a minute ago. Wait, my supply chain is my week in review because the people I'm talking to right now are like, hey, Daniel, like, I feel good. I feel real good about my compliance state. I'm like, that's fantastic. Good on you. Or maybe they were an early adopter, I'll call them. And they're like, I've already went through joint surveillance or I just got my CMMC cert. But then they were like, so supply chain, like that's a real flow down requirement in CMMC. It's like, yeah, it's like, if you're passing CUI, they got to be at the same level that you have to be for CMMC level 2. And they're like, oh, okay, interesting. Because here's what I've realized. IT people and trade compliance or supply chain risk people, they don't talk a lot. And when you get in a room and you ask to invite all seats to the table, all of the little light bulbs go off, right? IT's like, listen, I've got our company covered. Like we built an enclave or we moved everyone into a compliant state. Like we're good internally. But then the supply chain manager, who a lot of times will report to the COO, they're like, oh, but we're not. We've got 100 people below us that we have to do that's dependent on this work, especially like in the construction space. I was at a construction conference a week or two ago, and that was the topic, period. It wasn't how do we get compliant. It was how do we get our whole supply chain compliant. And
Yeah.
everyone's wrestling with that right now.
You absolutely have to pay attention to it, right? You know, the way that this all plays out is that it doesn't matter if just you have your certification. That's critical. But then if you're going to have to flow CUI to any of your suppliers and you rely on those suppliers, if you can't use them because flow down precludes you from using them because they're not certified, it's a full halt, right? Like you're not going to be able to perform on those contracts anyways. And so drastic measures need to be taken to not flow CUI to organizations further downstream who don't actually need it in order to get you what you need, or to not accept like overly lazy blanket determinations, like everything on this contract is somehow CUI. There might not have been a big motivating factor to apply more scrutiny to that, to try and fix that bad presumption until now, because needing to do those flow downs is now an existential threat, and everybody gets it, right? Chances are your suppliers are smaller and less mature than you.
Absolutely.
So it's tough for you.
Budget, probably. Yeah. I mean, it's like one of those things where primes, I really hope this happens. I don't think it will happen. But Ryan, one of your main offerings I know at DefCert is CUI scoping and honestly de-scoping CUI, the other kind of side of it. Like I've got this big thing that says at CUI what parts are, what parts aren't. I'm hoping every prime is going through your master class in that to figure out how to leave parts of their supply chain out of scope. But I have a feeling that whole CYA terminology, I have a feeling primes are probably going to lean a little heavy on the CYA and just say, listen, if we only have one that can do this, they're going to get the work. Like all we need is one in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of sort of sole supplier opportunities, I think, that are coming up here when we try to look at like the supply chain and figure out where can we make the biggest difference, right? What can we do to preserve the most contract revenue and not be so disruptive? I think our linchpin that we're always looking for are OEMs.
Yeah.
So, the mega primes, they're swimming in CUI, right? It doesn't bother them. They're inoculated to it. They've got bigger fish to fry, more sensitive data to manage. When you get down into that next tier down, or even a tier below that, what we want to find are organizations who are the design authority for what they sell, because they stand a much better chance of being able to limit CUI data flows, right?
Yep.
There's proprietary exclusions. There's all these other things that are in play. And so hopefully they can sort of do what I jokingly call CUI laundering, where like they get the customer's specifications and requirements in, and they're just matching those with existing capabilities they have. At that point, there's no good reason to keep the customer document moving through a lot of these supplier relationships. Build a compliance matrix that reflects your product and flow that to suppliers, stop the flow. And so it's those OEMs that I think are going to be able to control their own destiny in ways that are going to be much harder for people even further down the chain doing build to print work or stuff like that.
Man, it's crazy. And the November 10th date ain't going any further away from us. You know what I mean? Like that's the other part of it. It's like some of these exercises, like I wish they did it 2 years ago or a year ago. Cause let me ask you a question, because you do a lot of these, and we'll get to some questions in chat. Jacob is actually here in chat with some good ones. How long does it typically take an organization to kind of turn that ship of like, we get a CUI document in, and the kind of the recategorization or mapping to existing POTS products they have or something like that, where they can then say, hey, vendor A, I just need part A, B, C, D. That's just a regular part. And without context, they can just procure it without having to flow down the diagram, the blueprint, whatever, engineering drawing. Is that like a 3-month process, 6-month? Like what are we looking at there to move an organization in that direction?
Yeah, I think a big part of it just comes down to how many existing processes are there that you can just document and tap into, like building brand new processes. Like, so for example, if your organization has never built internal documents to track adherence to customer requirements, yeah, you're going to be at this for a while. You're building a new operational capability.
Yeah.
But for organizations who already took steps like that, you know, I already build my own internal requirements compliance matrix or something of that nature. This is just an additive ingredient, right? We're not even asking you to change that process. We might ask you to add a column, you know, to that spreadsheet or something like that. But like ideally, we're looking to permanently identify that certain things you would have entered into that document don't qualify as CUI. So that's very durable. So, you know, usually when we're working with an organization on CUI stuff, I mean, it can be a couple months just to work through a lot of those core concepts, but hopefully a lot of those things you can pick up and run with pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we'd love to find ways to like just teach some of those down in the weeds concepts as more standalone things to give people the head start they need to then like apply it to their organization. But yeah, it does take time, but it doesn't take as much time as, I don't know, implementing NIST 800-171 in a system that didn't even need it in the first place because it didn't need to be handling CUI. So when you're in a horse race to figure out how to get certified the fastest, it can be a pretty quick turnaround compared to some of the other tasks at hand.
Yep, because the bigger the scope, typically the bigger the cost to get compliant with that. So scoping is very, 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 very important. And with that, we'll go with Wilson Eyes from Home Improvement here. Jacob Horn has a question. So the reason Jacob's not here is he's at a conference, Engage 2025. This one's for you, Ryan, and I get this all the time as well. Is G-code CUI? If I get unmarked drawings, I know should be marked. What do I do? And shop floor computer can't download CUI, just view, still in scope or nah. So we got the trifecta of questions. I'm going to take down the question here and leave you to begin the answers, my friend.
Yeah. So for that first question, is G-code CUI? Just like a simple caution would be anytime you're going to ask a question, is insert information type CUI, you're probably not going to get good answers out of that alone as its question, because it's very rare for an entire information type to just be regulated all the time forever due to its nature, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you end up needing to pack some descriptive language around that in order to better answer that question. You got to remember that controlled unclassified information always needs to be information that is regulated, specifically by a law or regulation that's in the CUI registry. So if you start to break down, what do you think would regulate G-code? It's almost always going to be the CUI categories called controlled technical information or export controlled information. They actually share authorities, which I think is very unhelpful, and someone should fix that. But you know, the two authorities we have to care about are the ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, and EAR, which is like the step down for when something isn't governed by the ITAR. I won't go into too much detail here, but in order to identify that G-code needs to be CUI, I would need to identify that the G-code itself is technical data that would either like result in a finished part that is clearly recognizable, or it's been machined enough to the point where it's recognizable for its form or function. So if we're just like cutting raw materials down to even more rudimentary shapes or something like that, that G-code isn't actually resulting in something that you can say, I know what that is. That's a blah, blah, blah for a blah, blah, blah. So like there's something to consider there. We would also need to understand like what are we machining, right? What is the end item, if you will? So if it is a part, what part, right? Is it a you know, an intake manifold for a commercial dual use gas powered engine for a small transport vehicle, or like is this the super spicy, you know, center column for like the wing support for a jet fighter, and like, you know, this is the only thing that this goes into and gets used for. We also want to know about that end use, right? My dual use part, where is it headed? Is it going into something that is regulated itself? And if so, is it particularly responsible for helping that thing be what it is, do what it does? And so a lot of times you have to like move further upstream and talk about the nature of the thing you're about to machine represented in that G code, and figure out if there's enough raw data and access and plot points to where if you pulled that G code out, you'd say, man, this is directly related to resulting in the performance and capabilities of the end item in the right end use that is caught by this US munitions category paragraph. Like, and people don't like when I give them that answer because they're like, no, is G code CUI?
Right. Excuse me, Ryan. I think you missed the question. It's like, I need a binary. I need a yes, no, please. Thank you.
Yeah. And as we like to say, you know, easy decisions, hard life, hard decisions, easy life. If you bake in all of the logic like we just described into your process, you will sleep so well at night. If you're looking for a cheap, quick, easy answer, you're just kicking the can down the road, and there will be more pain and suffering later. So I don't want people to have to apply requirements to embedded technologies and OT if they aren't actually handling CUI. So I think there was another question in there about
if I get unmarked drawings
I know should be marked, what do I do? Well, first things first, you need to have some good logic for why you think it should be marked, right? Does it make your tummy rumble? That's subjective determination, right? If there's other high quality indicators that something should have been marked CUI, that's what we want to key in on. And so you need good logic behind this, right? So we've done a lot of research, for example, on DoD distribution statements. DoD will tell you, if you go straight to the DoD CUI registry and go to the FAQ and click on the question that says, distribution statements, if I get a distribution statement, does that mean I have CUI? And DoD is like, no, don't confuse these issues. We put distribution, this Frank's Red Hot, we put it on everything, including unclassified, uncontrolled information that just hasn't been reviewed for public release yet. So it's just imprecise. So we've done a lot of research on what listed reason for the distribution statement, they're called defense categories, are actually backed by a CUI authority.
Oh, interesting.
And that can help at least triangulate on like, here's why I feel weird when I look at this document. Here's why I'm concerned. It says critical technology. And when I pair that with an export control warning statement, I know that it's probably either the ITAR or the EAR that garnered that marking. So now I'm at least grounded in a CUI authority for like moving forward to say, I need to ask somebody, can you confirm the CUI category for this? Speaking of like what to do when you see something that this feels like CUI, it's not good enough to say it's CUI. When you say, oh, that's CUI, you just said, oh, that's a piece of information that could be governed by 400 different laws, authorities, or government-wide policy. I can't act on that. Could you? Nope. So I got to know the category. And that's our number one course of action we ask everyone to do. If you see a banner marking with no title box, if you see everything on this contract is CUI, if you see something that you think is mismarked, your only course of action is what category? That's the only question you should be asking the person who sent it to you or the person whose point of contact information is on that document.
All right, last one, and then we're going to move on from Jacob. He just bundled all sorts of ones in here. Shop floor computer can't download CUI, just view, still in scope or not. I'm going to add one caveat to this, Ryan. That shop floor is not using VDI. Okay. The shop floor is looking at this drawing through Chrome, right? They're clicking it up on their shop floor computer. Is that computer in scope? Yes or no?
Yeah, this is another question we get a lot because people are like, I don't download it. It's like, brother, you had to cache that file to view it. Like read only might mean that you can't move that around, but it's on that computer as the cached file. Like it's in the memory of Chrome, or it's in your local file system, whether you realize it or not, as a temp file. And so that local computer is absolutely storing and processing that data. and that's something that you want to help people understand and correct. I think maybe the reason people freak out so much is that they think that because now they've taken that file and stored it and processed it, that now they're like all of these bad things are happening. If you can find a way to stop the data from leaving that browser, maybe you're using like a managed browser, not just like whatever came with the computer, and you're actually applying some rules around where the file can be downloaded to and cached, and is that in protected memory or not, and all of these other things, having that local computer in scope when the area that's in scope is mostly that application, the browser, that's a lot more manageable than Wild West. It could go anywhere, be saved and uploaded to anything, transferred to anything. So just, know that it's not the end of the world if that's happening, but you do need to know what happens next in the narrative.
Yep. That's the thing I don't think people understand. People ask all the time, they're like, Daniel, like to the same point, oh, I just look at it in a web browser. And the misunderstanding of data flow and honestly how technology works. Even when I'm talking to technical people, I'm like, well, what happens with that file? But also, like, can they print that file from that web browser if they wanted to? Is your local network in scope now because they're sending it over the network in plain text? Because it's not by default encrypted? Is your printer in scope? Is that room in scope? Is your facility in scope? Just the constant, like, you just ask one question after another, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, maybe I have a problem. Like, maybe you do have a problem, And that's where those fun things come into play, right? Where it's like, let's just do good scoping. Let's just do some good scoping. So, all right, few questions here. Nicholas, what are common issues with VoIP? Is it even realistic for a SIEM to monitor it or establish MFA on it?
Well, Daniel, I'm sure you have a lot of questions around things like VoIP. You're doing a lot of work in the Microsoft ecosystem, and Teams is part of the discussion. And before that, it was Skype for Business and all these other things. I think that VoIP really gets people in a tailspin, right? Because it doesn't feel like the same discussion as what you're having around other technology. And I would just point people to the fact that when NIST literally killed off this requirement in 853, which is now reflected in 80171 revision 3, they're like, yeah, we realized that was just the wrong way to go about it, because voice over IP is just like any other protocol. So we already have a requirement to restrict or prohibit ports, protocols, and services in the world of 80171. That's your 347 requirement, right? So just do it there. And I think once you help people understand that, like, this isn't a discussion on like how good my like Link VoIP handset is, or whether I need to like listen in and eavesdrop on people's phone conversations,
I've had
or like all of these different things. Yeah, once you realize like, no, it's just protocols. If people aren't supposed to use an unauthorized VoIP service to maybe talk about things they shouldn't in a certain situation, yeah, make sure they use the approved company tools for that. Don't let them run, Blue Jeans on their company computer. And when it comes to the protocols and services themselves, like you would monitor that as you would any other traffic, right? Your firewall is going to understand that it's part of a Teams call just as easily as it will anything else that it's reaching out to, especially with a layer 7 firewall. So I think, it just realize like this doesn't need to be as weird or different as any other ports, protocols, or services management discussion you would normally have.
Perfect. All right. This is fun, Ryan. David, what do I tell my engineering teams regarding how to make proprietary information created directly by our teams and not owned by the government? Great delineation there. Any information marked as CUI is owned by the government, so I'm not sure how to direct my teams regarding marking, labeling this type of information. As far as I know, any information marked as CUI. Okay, good question. So I'm a company. I have a defense contract that could be a mix of my proprietary data and maybe data I'm generating specifically for that defense contract. Where's the line? What's in scope? What's not in scope? Is my proprietary now CUI? What parts do they mark what? Right? If proprietary and CUI coexist, can I have two markings on there? What does that look like?
Sorry, I was doing my
Yeah,
little
doing the
Wilson fence on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a fantastic question. I had to get corrected on this very early in my journey of understanding CUI, in the sense that I also thought that if the government wants something marked as CUI, that they own it. And a fantastic former contracting officer, Benjamin McMartin, who I think might be over at GovTribe now or something, but he's been around the block, helps a lot of people understand DoD contracting in particular. He's like, well, hold up.
Wait.
The government doesn't own everything they contract from you. In fact, that's not their default anymore at all. The DoD in particular wants to buy capabilities. They don't need to buy data packages, right? So in a lot of these cases, the government, because of federal record keeping rules, must have a copy of anything that is necessary for them to operate as an agency. That doesn't mean they want to own it. Particularly, they don't want to pay to own it. So in most cases, they're negotiating rights. So they simply want to be able to possess something that you own and to be able to use it based on pre-agreed rules, right? Should they be able to give your IP to your direct competitor and say, make this instead? I don't want that. Okay, I'm going to assert data rights on that deliverable that I'm going to give to the government. It could be government purpose rights, it could be limited rights. But in any case, a lot of the times the reason I'm going to assert, and if you're not familiar with what DRAs are, data rights assertions, like you got to go talk to your contracts management team. This is a very well-trodden path, right? You need to understand that oftentimes the reason that you will cite for why you're asserting these data rights is because it was developed at private expense. That means I gave you a firm fixed bid. Yep. This is not work for hire. I'm giving you whatever you asked for, maybe this lot of parts, and it requires that it comes with certain operational documentation on how to install it, how to maintain it, whatever the thing might be, the as-built drawing, I don't know. But it is all developed at private expense, charged to indirect cost pools. I gave you a firm fixed bid.
Yep.
And in those cases, as long as your government buyer signs off on those assertions, everyone is shaking hands that you maintain ownership of those deliverables. The government simply needed the rights to use them for government purposes or whatever it was. So that's critical, right? Because now we can split apart the conversation. This is not a matter of ownership. This is ownership and rights are two separate calculations that are done by you and by the government. So NARA back in 2020 clarified in one of their CUI stakeholders sessions that the information that you generate and maintain ownership of is not proprietary for you, or sorry, it's not CUI for you.
Yeah.
The government will get it. They might mark it as CUI because they have totally different regulations that make them babysit that data differently, right? And that stop them from giving it to your competitors, that whatever the reason is. They might even send your document back to you marked as CUI.
That's my favorite question that you answered. That and the what if I get CUI pre-contract award? It's like, what are these like loophole things where like, oh, I sent you my rate sheet or I sent you this technical data that's mine and you send it back to me as CUI? This is a side tangent. Ryan, do I have to protect that data as CUI now, even though it's my data?
Yeah, and NARA says no, like it's not CUI for you. And this is what we call the proprietary paradox all the time, right? The exact same document is or is not CUI based on who's possessing it. And that's just because a ton of the regulations that are in the CUI authorities and active CUI authorities, they tell the government how to do their job. And there's no way to like make the jump over into the private sector because of the way it was written. So there's definitely elements there that you have to keep in mind. So to respond to that question, if you're trying to talk to your engineers about how to create proprietary data that doesn't qualify as CUI, you have to move to the left on the timeline and understand how have you set ground rules for what you maintain ownership of on the contract to begin with. And there's some great case law on this. The Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals has resolved multiple opinions recently where they, in writing, they're like, none of us, not the DoD who was part of this hearing, not the contractor, not us, nobody here disagrees that whoever generates that technical data on that contract maintains ownership of it. Like that is in writing. So
Wow.
build your argument out, lay out the logic. And at that point, it really shouldn't be your engineer's problem to figure out who owns this. That should have already been resolved before project kickoff.
Man, Ryan, you're going after it today, and I love it because people don't. I say people loosely. It's like the world doesn't know this kind of stuff, right? And it's like to your point earlier, and Jacob's point, it's like if I can know this, I can descope and control for my organization and everybody downstream if they will just pay attention, right? And know that not everything that I do is going to be CUI. A lot of it's proprietary, right? It's like I'm just giving you the ability to use this for the government. That's it. That's all I'm doing. All right. Pivoting a little bit back to scoping of data flow here and assets. Dark green, longtime watcher, is an endpoint using VDI that allows keyboard, video, mouse, plus mic and webcam pass through, still out of scope. So the CMMC scoping guidance does not call out mic and webcam.
Mm-hmm.
So that is processing, storing, and transmitting data that could potentially be CUI. Could be a collaborative computing device, maybe. I don't know at that point. So Ryan, how would you classify this? Is it out of scope? Is it now a CUI asset? Is it something in between?
Yeah, great question. You have to look at what I believe to be the intent of the VDI carve out in the CMMC final rule, which is if you found a way to keep any CUI files or data from leaving the VDI and ending up on the local device, those are the conditions under which we will allow the local device to be out of scope. I firmly believe that's the intent. I'm sure you can find strong support for that in the Federal Register comments that came with that final rule. So if we think about this, if the goal is really to stop that data from moving, is there an opportunity in your context for microphone back and forth or webcam back and forth to end up somehow allowing controlled unclassified information to leave your VDI instance? And admittedly, there's some VDI technologies out there that will try to like locally render video and audio because it just does a better job than the virtual desktop that's 100 miles away. So in those cases, we would just want to say, under what circumstances are you transmitting voice and video? Is it for meetings? Is it for discussions? Cool. Talk to your trade compliance team. Have you ever been at risk for providing what's called a defense service in a meeting? If you don't know what that is, it means you're basically having a down in the weeds technical discussion and you're actually providing levels of detail and guidance at the same level as technical data that would itself be subject to like the ITAR or EAR controlled technology. So this isn't just getting on a Teams call and saying, hey guys, just making sure project X is still on plan. Yep, we're good. How's everything going? Fantastic. Like we're talking about like somebody
Nitty-gritty, yeah.
Yeah, somebody in another state is troubleshooting your complex system that you sold them that is also regulated. And you are literally having to say, all right, if you pop hatch cover B, and you start to go through that, those are the situations that would put you at risk of potentially providing a defense service over that streaming video voice call or meeting. That's the stuff that I would be worried about. If that's not you, I think you are still staying well within the intent of the VDI carve outs without having to do any hand wringing over mic and webcam.
Yeah. All right. Our fearless leader, Scott Edwards, had a question. This goes back to some of our earlier questions. How often are your customers, Ryan, actually changing CUI data flows to descope infrastructure? So they go through this project, right? Mm-hmm. Which we love partnering with you on. And like, okay, I've got this incredible deliverable. My IT team's happy because it's less scope. My executives are happy because it's less scope. And now it requires effort to change it to actually become less scope. Um, is that actually happening a lot of times? Is this a 5 out of 10, 9 out of 10 times? What's the kind of going rate of actual organizational adoption of, quite honestly, probably a really good overall decision for the company to make, but sometimes they don't necessarily always make the right or the best decision. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, I would say I will answer this question, but I think more often than not, the biggest things we get out of these projects is actually correctly applying CUI definitions and identifying that there were uh, data storage locations or certain line of business applications or things like that that we just didn't know whether they were handling CUI. So we just kind of assumed guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we're carving out wholesale data flows and applications and workloads because we are able to identify that, like, hey, nothing that you're keying in on that purchase order from the customer document qualifies as CUI. Like data field by data field, we apply a decontrol code to those items. Customer name ain't CUI.
Yep.
Quantity ain't CUI.
Right.
I am way more worried about the other stuff. So sometimes like you carve out the ERP, but then you still focus on the PLM or whatever those things are. So that's the more common outcome, just correctly applying these definitions all the way through. And we do get a ton of descoping wins out of that. As far as changing a real deal CUI flow, a lot of times those wins are in those supply chain
Mm,
relationships where it's like, I don't want to say lazily, but I was efficiently taking a customer document and just retransmitting it wholesale to a supplier because this is how we get stuff done quickly. And if I'm able to add a step where I create a new derivative document for use in communications with my supplier, where I can prove none of the data I took off the customer document is CUI, that's a decontrolled compliance matrix or a decontrolled supplier request or a whatever. Those are the changes to the process, right? That's where you can say downstream of this, I'm not even leveraging the customer document anymore. So those are the times where like a change to the process, it preserves an entire business relationship. You got to chase units of measure that are worth it from an ROI perspective to change business process. And that's what we're looking to do.
all right. This is a great follow-up, a question that we had entered on I think it was the CUI hotline form. CUI hunting. How do we go about finding all CUI in our system? I'm going to go ahead and help a little bit. I think finding all is a little bit too optimistic, probably, but I think finding maybe a good portion and at least some of the source or watering holes of that CUI is probably a little bit better to articulate here. So, Ryan, I'm a manufacturer. I'm a couple hundred people. I'm on my CUI journey. I'm hunting. Like, how do I find it? What keywords do I use? What tools can I use? Like, is this a manual interview process? Do I have to know contract clauses? Like, what do I have to have in my fancy little tool belt here to pull out to figure out where in the world the CUI actually is?
Yeah, I think that it is absolutely a cross-functional effort, right? You mentioned before, like, are there tools I can use to identify CUI? Well, you might be able to use a tool to identify marked CUI,
Yeah.
but you're generating data. So are you going to be able to use those tools to spot all your generated data and whether it's CUI? You're also getting poorly marked documents. Like,
Yeah.
what if you have an old nasty scan-in facsimile copy of some document from 30 years ago? There's all sorts of anti-patterns that might stop you from finding all the CUI programmatically. And so it is cross-functional. We always start with the intake of initial customer documents because that's where we're going to start to see CUI from third parties introduced into your work streams. And then from there, we're going to try and follow that type of document. So just to be clear, you don't have to find all the CUI to identify that this business process and the application that uses it handled CUI at least once before, or at least some of the time.
Yep.
We are not like we're not going to develop dual process, right? that business process is now a CUI handling process. So if you can find even one example of CUI persisting somewhere, being stored or used somewhere, that's a CUI process unless you change your process. So we are looking for positive examples, just a few, and then we say any way that you consume that data downstream is going to be a CUI process. So now let's look at process analysis, right?
Yep.
I don't need to keep asking, what about, all the CUI? Chances are that whatever data flows those example documents take
Yep.
is going to cover 80% of your workflows anyways for that kind of document. So that's how we equivocate things and like move more quickly through this without boiling the ocean. So from that perspective, like we want to see, what are the document types you're getting? Where are you putting them? How do you use those document types? Is it look but don't touch? Or do you create new formats based on what you read in those documents? Are you keying into a system? Are you creating a new spreadsheet? What are you doing? What comes next? Where does that get stored? What application do you use to open it? And just keep going through that until you either see the data leave the organization, like to go out to a supplier, or stop moving. And that's how you do that. If you can figure that out, now you can zoom back out and say, did that just cover the 90% use case of the type of work that we do? Great. If we're finding CUI somewhere else at this point, it is coming in from another source.
Yep.
It's an outlier. We can back clean up on that. But the fact that it didn't come up in a discussion that covered how our business operates and makes its money means that whatever we find later will be isolated and easy to manage. Because it's like, yeah, I got an industry briefing one time and it's on a lab. Okay, great. We'll fix that.
Yeah, that's an easy one. That's low hanging
Yeah.
fruit here. So Bruce had a follow up to Scott's questions, but I think fits pretty well into this. FCI is probably the worst defined word in the English language. I think it's like a sentence of maybe not even a full sentence in FAR 52.204.21. Would the customer name, quantity, and federal contract number constitute federal contracting information, which is basically, to summarize, private information between you and the government that's not transactional information, is a very simplistic example of that. So, Ryan, let's put CUI on the shelf for a second. Let's talk about our good friend, the redheaded stepchild of FCI, which supposedly is going to impact 65, 66%, I think is what the DoD estimates for CMMC level 1. So a large portion, tens of thousands of contractors. What the freak is FCI? And does these things that Bruce called out constitute itself as being FCI?
Yeah. So I'm going to read off the definition of FCI because I never want to like paraphrase when it could be useful to see all the moving parts. So from FAR 52.204.21, we're told this: federal contract information means information not intended for public release. Who gets to decide intent? That's fun. That is provided by or generated for the government under a contract to develop or deliver a product or service to the government, but not including information provided by the government to the public, such as on public websites, or simple transactional information, such as necessary to process payments. So when I look at customer name, quantity, contract number, if I was going to invoice the government, I would probably need to use all three of those. The government won't just pay an invoice without a contract number on it. And if I'm billing them for a quantity of an item, guess what? That's how we calculate the final price, and that they can confirm that it's what they awarded you as a price. And then, of course, the customer name, the agency itself, I'm sure they require you to fill that out on whatever form you submit that. So like these three examples in particular feel easier to defeat as like not FCI. And so if something is not FCI and it's not CUI, it is just something else. And this is what I try to tell people. There's multiple kinds of data floating around at any point in time. Some of it is just completely uncontrolled, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking at even more information around this and you're not sure, right, if it's FCI, it wouldn't be information that's customarily published by the government to like government websites as well. you should jump on usaspending.gov and see how much of your contract award is already published by the government in the public domain. And I wouldn't be worried about those pieces of information either. Also, like, are you performing on a sam.gov opportunity? How much of the information for your award was published publicly on sam.gov? I'm not saying that you absolutely like want to do this research project every time, but if those data objects or items, as we call them, are consistently in the public domain, I'm going to want to build a working definition that excludes them from FCI.
Yep. Man. All right. One quick follow-up to that, and this might fall FCI or CUI categories. And I know you get this a lot because we've actually talked about this a lot. I have a part number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
Is that CUI or is that FCI? Or is that none of the above, Ryan? And I cannot wait. Are you going to throw me in it depends, or are we going to get a binary yes, no here?
I think that in my world, this can be a pretty binary answer. And that's just because, you're looking for a CUI authority that tries to control the dissemination or require safeguarding of part numbers, right? Part numbers by their nature are a normalization technique to get everyone to order and source the same thing, right?
Yep.
When we think about part numbers, they are what we codify in our world on the data decontrol side as indirect reference data, right? They are not directly related to making a thing or doing any of the other steps of production or installation. They're a reference number. When you go to the shop, make sure you pick up the right part number. Yep. A good example of how we look at this is if I gave you all the correct technical drawings, specifications, CAD models, you name it, all the directly related production data, and I gave you the wrong part number, you'd still produce the correct part. So, like, that should tell you that it's not a load-bearing piece of information. It's it's for just the most basic functions, right? And so from that perspective, I cannot think of a single situation where part numbers would qualify as CUI. Like, I just can't.
Or FCI.
I mean, part numbers are what you're going to bill against all day long.
All of our bases
right next
here,
to that quantity, right? And so, those kinds of things are so benign.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that people lose sleep over that, right?
Yep.
Once you can provide some positive examples of things that you see every day that don't qualify as CUI, like, that sparks hope.
Yes.
For people that, like, you might be able to steer some of this and better understand things.
Man. All right. This is getting good. Dan O'Dog's got a fun one. Just following back up on that G code discussion. So are you saying if we build software, retain the rights, it is not CUI to us, but maybe to the government? We have lots of confusion around this space. I think, based on what you said, that this is accurate. If it's proprietary, you build it, and the government is purchasing that, and you're giving them rights to use that in the government, you retain that even if it comes back to you marked as CUI.
Yeah, when we think about software in particular, first of all, just be aware there's an entire set of DFARS clauses for data rights assertions just for software because of how different it is. So just keep that in mind. Also, in most cases, the government is buying a license to your software. Like, they're not buying the source code. So from that perspective, a lot of times we will find situations where the contractor is delivering software, and they own the source code.
Yep.
They've negotiated licensing rights for the government, even when they might be, like, doing some customization for them or things like that. As long as you're correctly asserting those data rights, you're still going to own all of that and have the ability to commercialize it after the fact. And so in those cases, a lot of times the confusion sets in because you're going to ship that software to the customer and they're going to load CUI into the database that is in that software.
Yep.
And so then it's very hard for the government buyer, customer, user of that software who gets a CUI notification warning when they log into that software to extrapolate why the software isn't CUI, and they're not understanding that it's the data housed in that software. So a lot of software companies will do what we call develop low, deliver high, right? They're going to develop the source code in their environment. They're even going to stage synthetic fake data in there for proof of concept, show and tell. This is how the software works, but none of that data is real. And when they actually install and run the compiled code in the customer's government furnished equipment at their facility, that's when real world data gets loaded into it. And so maybe you're supporting that software. You might be accessing a system that has CUI in it if you directly access the back end or stuff like that. So just be aware, like those are some of the crossovers there. But it's rare to see software companies building software to where like the government just gets to own that source code.
All right, we're going to cut to a voicemail, Ryan. I think this is the first time we've done this here with you. So it's going to play a video. We're not going to be able to talk during the video. And then we're going to commentate after it plays here. So everybody, here we go.
And I have a question regarding printing already marked CUI. Is it acceptable to have controls, have procedural controls in place to state who can print and not print? It seems to be, or we've had some difficulty finding technical solutions that prevent people from printing on from file shares. So, question is, can I procedurally control that? Is that acceptable? Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to summarize what I think the intent of that call was. Thank you for calling in, by the way. If you have a long question, the voicemail is the best way. The number is scrolling down at the bottom here once it finishes looping back around here. So guy has a printer, doesn't want people to print CUI, can't find technical means to prevent CUI files from file shares being printed. So wants to know if a policy or procedure would support and leave the kind of that printer out of scope for being a CUI asset. Ryan, let's say we're assessors, we're going into an organization. Is that good enough, or am I gonna want to see some sort of technical controls implemented on that system?
Yeah, so be aware that obviously C3PAOs and lead assessors know what printers are and that they exist and what they are capable of being used for, right? So in a situation where you're going to be assessed and maybe you go through your scoping call with a C3PAO and you don't bring up printers at all, or you describe them as out of scope, it sounds like these printers are not logically separated.
Right.
So I wouldn't be able to leave them off my diagrams. I wouldn't be able to leave them out of my SSP. I'd have to mention their existence. And the only way that they get to be a contractor risk managed asset is if they're not intended to handle CUI and I have some sort of asset treatment in place, right?
Yep.
Could be policy and procedure. It could be a technical control. But whatever that is, the way that I explain that to my C3PAO, probably in that scoping call, would need to win them over, right?
Yep.
Like they would have to understand that, like, the way that you've done this is compelling and that they don't feel like they're being sold a bill of goods and that they're going to be comfortable moving forward with the assessment. So the ultimate arbiter of whether you can do this or not is going to be your C3PAO.
Yeah.
And so
and how good of a lawyer type, of the lawyer type you are, right? You got to defend your case.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just me personally. If someone was like, well, we have all these printers and it's very hard to control, but we've instructed people not to do it.
Don't do that.
I would want to see an amazing training program, like in order like to be really won over by that approach. And if I was doing my physical walkthrough as that C3PAO, I can't help but think I'd want to just ask a couple people like, hey, what are your rules on printing? And want to see people so familiar with that policy and that training program and those rules of behavior that it's muscle memory. They can just rattle it off. They're like, no, I wouldn't. Of course, we were sat down and explained the consequences of what happens when ...
Yep.
My guess would be that the resource commitment to achieve that is more money, time, and effort with a higher error rate than maybe talking to somebody who can come up with a more ingenious way to control that printing.
Maybe just have a separate CUI printer.
Yeah, there's got to be cheaper solutions to that problem than changing the totality of human behavior inside the organization.
Oh, that
so I think there's a technical control that would help a lot.
Yeah, try technical. It'll save you a lot of heartburn, a lot of acid reflux there. All right. 2 ways to protect CUI: physical compensating controls or encryption with FIPS. I've got a server locked in a room, Ryan. Doesn't need to be encrypted, assuming I have all the physical access controls in place around the building. Authorized access, cameras, visitor logs, the whole shebang. Do I actually have to encrypt my server? Which is a good question, because my server is not going to leave with me like a laptop. It's going to stay in that space. Help me out here a little bit.
Yeah. So in today's parlance, NIST 800-171 revision 2, we are allowed to use alternate physical safeguards to protect data at rest, right? So if I've got a locked room, a locked rack, whatever would prevent someone from getting access to that host or those drives, I'm okay in today's rule set, right?
Yep.
NIST 800-171 revision 3 seems to have omitted this as an available option in its updated language. And so in the coming months, years, whatever, when the class deviation for DFARS is lifted and we're now subject to Rev 3, we may have a different conversation than we are having today. So I would want people to be thinking about what needs to happen in order for this not to be a Band-Aid that I'm going to have to then do something drastic about later. So maybe that means for whatever reason you can't encrypt these hosts, or for whatever reason that they're not FIPS validated. How many years you got left on that baby?
Right.
How many years you got left on that weird garage sale super micro? And can I get something with like FIPS validated drives or FIPS validated firmware or whatever in place in time for Rev 3 to become real for me? That's your course of action. Do that.
Yeah. Do that. Do that. That's a good call.
Yeah. And that would be, I think, what we would recommend to anybody. You always have the alternative to reach out to the DoD CIO's office and say, like, hey, we believe these physical protections to be equally effective. And I can't help but notice you let us do it for X number of years already. Can you sign off on that as an equally effective alternative approach? And maybe they do. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So you got options, but that's what I would look at.
All right. One other one, and I've not actually seen this question asked, I don't think ever on the CUI hotlines. This is the first. I've seen some back and forth in regards to Bluetooth being CMMC compliant or not, depending on how it's used within an organization. What's your take on this? So Bluetooth isn't encrypted to FIPS encryption, right? It's just a transmission protocol. I mean, I guess that's a good question. I've got, let's say, Bluetooth keyboards, right? I've got other Bluetooth systems that I'm sending files between. Where's kind of the demarc of that being acceptable and then not acceptable?
All right. So I have severe justice issues. And so the topic of Bluetooth peripherals came up at one point with one of our clients that we're working with. And I ended up diving into this more than I ever thought I would.
Hey,
you could hear what I'm about to say and mistake me for a technical person, but trust me, this is just trauma based. We identified in looking into the way that you can configure Windows in particular for how it interacts and interfaces with Bluetooth devices. And we identified that there are certain class IDs of device types that drive what they can do over Bluetooth.
Oh, interesting.
So you have Bluetooth class IDs that allow you to just do voice, like audio or voice, like two-way audio, video, not video,
like
but audio,
kind
things
of
like that. So like hands-free, I think, is the class ID for those. And then there's Bluetooth that allows you to do file transfers, right? So you can, on a class-by-class level, write like an Intune device configuration profile that will allow Bluetooth devices to connect for the purposes of hands-free or audio, like for listening to Spotify. And you can not allow Bluetooth to operate in a class mode that would allow it to do file transfers.
Interesting.
So if we're not transferring CUI over that Bluetooth medium, I should not need it to be FIPS validated. So that's I think what we would look at in a lot of those situations is like, are the things you're transmitting over Bluetooth generally like not that big of a concern, or things of that nature. So I think that's usually what we would look at. I know that there are still like some latent risks of like somebody somehow finding a way to like trick you into connecting to their Bluetooth and like doing some key logging or something. I don't know, man. But that's some tinfoil hat stuff, and I look forward to your Black Hat talk.
Well, on that lovely note, Ryan, we are at the hour. These hours go by so fast. Thank you for everyone watching today. Ryan, thank you for joining. If you have questions we didn't get to, we're going to store them up for next week. We just kind of keep rolling them over like the old singular minute plan we had. Yeah, if you have a question that's a little bit longer than just what LinkedIn and YouTube will capture here, leave a voicemail using the number below, fill out our form, the CUI hotline. And yeah, we hope everyone has a great weekend. And Ryan, thanks again, my friend. We hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, I love coming back and having these conversations.
There we go. Have a good one, guys.